Question 1. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of increased regulatory scrutiny regarding Sime Darby's palm oil plantation practices due to deforestation concerns. Which of the following stakeholder-centric approaches best balances immediate operational efficiency with long-term environmental sustainability and regulatory compliance? Option A. Immediately halt all land clearing activities to eliminate any risk of regulatory noncompliance, regardless of the impact on production targets and profitability. Option B. Implement stricter internal monitoring of land clearing activities and invest in sustainable agricultural technologies to reduce the environmental footprint, while proactively engaging with regulatory bodies to understand evolving compliance expectations. Option C. Continue current operational practices, assuming that existing regulatory frameworks are sufficient and that any potential fines would be a manageable cost of doing business. Option D. Focus solely on maximizing short-term yield from existing plantations to offset potential future costs associated with regulatory changes, without significant investment in new environmental technologies. The correct answer is B. Implement stricter internal monitoring of land clearing activities and invest in sustainable agricultural technologies to reduce the environmental footprint, while proactively engaging with regulatory bodies to understand evolving compliance expectations. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial interests of Sime Darby with the long-term sustainability and ethical considerations of its operations, particularly concerning environmental impact. The pressure to meet short-term profit targets can create a conflict with the responsible management of natural resources, which is a core aspect of corporate social responsibility and increasingly subject to regulatory scrutiny. Careful judgment is required to ensure that decisions are not only profitable, but also compliant with environmental laws and ethical standards, thereby safeguarding the company's reputation and its license to operate. The correct approach involves a proactive and integrated risk management strategy that prioritizes environmental stewardship alongside financial performance. This means not just reacting to regulatory breaches, but actively seeking to minimize environmental impact through sustainable practices, investing in cleaner technologies, and transparently reporting on environmental performance. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the evolving regulatory landscape that expects companies like Sime Darby to operate sustainably. Adherence to relevant environmental regulations, such as those pertaining to land use, emissions, and waste management, is paramount. Furthermore, ethical considerations demand that the company acts as a responsible custodian of the environment for future generations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost reduction, without considering the environmental consequences, would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to violations of environmental protection laws, resulting in fines, legal action, and reputational damage. For instance, neglecting to invest in proper waste disposal or pollution control measures, even if it saves money in the short term, directly contravenes environmental regulations and ethical obligations. Another incorrect approach might be to engage in selective reporting, highlighting positive environmental initiatives while downplaying or ignoring negative impacts. This lack of transparency erodes stakeholder trust and can be seen as a breach of disclosure requirements and ethical conduct. Professionals at Sime Darby should employ a decision-making framework that integrates risk assessment with stakeholder engagement and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Identifying all relevant stakeholders, investors, employees, local communities, regulators, environmental groups, and understanding their concerns. 2. Assessing risks not only in financial terms, but also in terms of environmental, social, and reputational impact. 3. Evaluating potential decisions against the backdrop of current and anticipated regulations, as well as ethical principles. 4. Prioritizing long-term sustainability and responsible resource management, even if it entails short-term costs. 5. Fostering a culture of transparency and accountability in environmental reporting and performance. Question 2. Compliance review shows that Sime Darby is considering a significant new contract facilitated by a third-party intermediary. The intermediary has a generally good reputation, but operates in a region with a higher perceived risk of corruption. The business development team is eager to finalize the deal due to its substantial financial implications. What is the most appropriate course of action for Sime Darby employees involved in this process? Option A. Conduct thorough due diligence on the intermediary, including verifying their legitimacy, assessing their reputation through independent sources, understanding the services they provide and the reasonableness of their fees, and documenting all findings to mitigate potential risks. Option B. Proceed with the contract immediately to secure the financial benefits, assuming the intermediary's good reputation is sufficient assurance of their ethical conduct. Option C. Rely solely on the intermediary's verbal assurances that they adhere to all ethical standards and anti-corruption laws without conducting any independent verification. Option D. Accept the intermediary's proposal without further investigation, given their established presence in the industry, and focus solely on negotiating the commercial terms of the contract. Correct answer is A. Conduct thorough due diligence on the intermediary, including verifying their legitimacy, assessing their reputation through independent sources, understanding the services they provide and the reasonableness of their fees, and documenting all findings to mitigate potential risks. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Sime Darby employees due to the inherent conflict between business objectives and regulatory compliance. The pressure to secure a significant contract can lead to overlooking or downplaying potential ethical and legal risks. Employees must exercise sound judgment to balance commercial interests with their obligation to adhere to the Sime Darby Code of Conduct and relevant Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission (MAC) guidelines. The challenge lies in identifying and mitigating risks proactively, rather than reactively, ensuring that all actions are transparent and justifiable. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough due diligence process that prioritizes understanding and mitigating potential risks associated with the third-party intermediary. This includes verifying the intermediary's legitimacy, assessing their reputation, and understanding the nature of their services and fees. This approach aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the ethical standards expected of Sime Darby employees. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit and letter of the Sime Darby Code of Conduct, which mandates integrity, transparency, and compliance with all applicable laws and regulations, including those enforced by the MAC. By conducting robust due diligence, employees demonstrate a commitment to preventing bribery and corruption, thereby safeguarding Sime Darby's reputation and legal standing. Incorrect approach is analysis. Proceeding with the contract without adequate due diligence on the intermediary, based solely on the potential for a large contract, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach ignores the heightened risk of engaging with an unknown entity, which could inadvertently lead to violations of anti-bribery and corruption laws, such as the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission Act 2009. It demonstrates a lack of integrity and a failure to uphold Sime Darby's commitment to ethical business practices. Relying solely on the intermediary's assurances of compliance without independent verification is also an unacceptable approach. This places undue trust in a third party whose bona fides have not been established, creating a loophole for potential misconduct. It fails to meet the standard of reasonable care expected in such business dealings, and could expose Sime Darby to severe penalties if the intermediary engages in corrupt practices. Accepting the intermediary's proposal at face value due to their established reputation in the industry, without specific checks related to the current engagement, is insufficient. While reputation is a factor, it does not absolve Sime Darby from the responsibility of conducting specific due diligence for each significant business relationship, especially when dealing with intermediaries who may operate in high-risk environments or have access to sensitive information. This approach risks complacency and overlooks the possibility of past or present unethical conduct that may not be widely known. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Sime Darby should adopt a risk-based approach to third-party engagement. This involves 1. Identifying potential risks associated with the engagement, including the nature of the business, the jurisdiction, and the intermediary's role. 2. Conducting proportionate due diligence based on the identified risks. This may range from basic checks for low-risk engagements to more in-depth investigations for high-risk scenarios. 3. Documenting all due diligence activities and decisions. 4. Seeking legal and compliance advice when uncertainties arise. 5. Escalating concerns to senior management or the compliance department if red flags are identified. This systematic process ensures that business objectives are pursued responsibly, with a strong emphasis on ethical conduct and regulatory adherence, thereby protecting both the individual and the organization. Question 3. The risk matrix shows a moderate to high likelihood of negative community reaction and potential regulatory scrutiny regarding the environmental impact of a new plantation development for Sime Darby. Which of the following stakeholder-centric approaches best addresses these identified risks? Option A. Proceed with the development as planned, focusing on maximizing yield, and address any community concerns or regulatory issues only if they arise. Option B. Initiate immediate community consultations and conduct comprehensive environmental impact assessments, incorporating feedback into the development plan before proceeding. Option C. Delay environmental impact assessments and community consultations until after the initial phase of development to avoid project delays and associated costs. Option D. Focus solely on the potential financial benefits of the new plantation, assuming that regulatory bodies will approve the project based on its economic contribution. The correct answer is B. Initiate immediate community consultations and conduct comprehensive environmental impact assessments, incorporating feedback into the development plan before proceeding. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial interests of Sime Darby with the long-term sustainability and ethical considerations of its operations, particularly concerning environmental impact. The pressure to meet short-term targets can often conflict with the need for responsible resource management and stakeholder trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that decisions align with both regulatory compliance and corporate social responsibility. The correct approach involves proactively engaging with affected communities and regulatory bodies to understand and mitigate potential environmental risks associated with the new plantation development. This aligns with the principles of responsible business conduct and good corporate governance, which are increasingly emphasized by regulatory frameworks and investor expectations. Specifically, it reflects a commitment to transparency, stakeholder engagement, and proactive risk management, which are crucial for maintaining Sime Darby's reputation and license to operate. This approach demonstrates adherence to principles of environmental stewardship and social responsibility, often embedded within corporate governance codes and sustainability reporting guidelines relevant to listed companies like Sime Darby. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate cost savings by delaying environmental impact assessments and community consultations would be professionally unacceptable. This failure would violate regulatory requirements that mandate such assessments and consultations before significant development projects commence. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for the rights and well-being of local communities and the environment, potentially leading to reputational damage, legal challenges, and operational disruptions. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on the potential for increased short-term profitability without adequately considering the environmental and social externalities, would also be professionally unsound. This narrow focus neglects the broader stakeholder perspective and the long-term value creation that sustainable practices foster. It risks contravening regulatory obligations related to environmental protection and social impact, and could lead to significant penalties and loss of public trust. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that integrates risk assessment with stakeholder engagement and regulatory compliance. This involves identifying all relevant stakeholders, understanding their concerns and expectations, assessing potential risks and their impacts, and developing mitigation strategies that are both compliant with regulations and ethically sound. A proactive and transparent approach, prioritizing long-term sustainability and responsible corporate citizenship, is essential for navigating complex business challenges and ensuring the enduring success of Sime Darby. Question 4. The risk matrix shows that Sime Darby's new plantation expansion project in a sensitive ecological zone presents a high risk of negative impact on local indigenous communities and biodiversity. As a project manager, what is the most appropriate course of action to address these identified risks from a stakeholder perspective? Option A. Proceed with the expansion as planned, focusing on maximizing yield and economic benefits, and address any community or environmental complaints only if they escalate to formal legal challenges. Option B. Implement minimal, visible environmental protection measures and conduct a brief consultation with a few hand-picked community representatives to create an appearance of stakeholder engagement. Option C. Prioritize immediate cost savings by reducing the budget allocated for environmental impact assessments and community development programs, assuming that potential future issues can be managed with contingency funds. Option D. Proactively engage with local community leaders and environmental NGOs to understand their concerns and collaboratively develop mitigation strategies that align with Sime Darby's sustainability policies and relevant environmental regulations. The correct answer is D. Proactively engage with local community leaders and environmental NGOs to understand their concerns and collaboratively develop mitigation strategies that align with Sime Darby's sustainability policies and relevant environmental regulations. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for Sime Darby employees due to the inherent conflict between achieving business objectives and adhering to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. The risk matrix highlights potential areas where the company's operations might be exposed to significant risks, requiring careful judgment to balance profitability with responsible business practices. The correct approach involves proactively engaging with stakeholders to understand their concerns and collaboratively developing mitigation strategies that align with Sime Darby's ethical framework and relevant regulations. This demonstrates a commitment to transparency, accountability, and good corporate governance, which are paramount in maintaining stakeholder trust and ensuring long-term sustainability. Specifically, this approach aligns with principles of corporate social responsibility and ethical business conduct expected of companies operating within established regulatory environments, such as those governed by Malaysian corporate law and relevant industry codes of conduct. It prioritizes open communication and a balanced consideration of all affected parties. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss stakeholder concerns as mere obstacles to profit. This failure stems from a narrow, short-sighted focus on financial gains, disregarding the potential for reputational damage, legal repercussions, and erosion of stakeholder confidence. Such an approach violates ethical principles of fairness and respect for all parties impacted by Sime Darby's operations, and could contravene regulatory requirements related to stakeholder engagement and environmental, social, and governance-esque disclosures. Another incorrect approach is to implement superficial mitigation measures without genuine commitment or adequate resource allocation. This demonstrates a lack of sincerity and a failure to address the root causes of the identified risks. It can lead to a perception of tokenism, further alienating stakeholders and potentially resulting in continued noncompliance or ethical breaches. This approach fails to meet the spirit of regulatory compliance and ethical stewardship, which demands substantive action rather than mere cosmetic changes. Finally, an incorrect approach involves prioritizing immediate cost savings over long-term risk management and stakeholder well-being. While cost efficiency is important, it should not come at the expense of ethical conduct or regulatory adherence. This approach can lead to significant unforeseen costs down the line, including fines, legal battles, and loss of business, ultimately harming Sime Darby's financial health and reputation. It reflects a failure to understand the interconnectedness of financial performance, ethical behavior, and regulatory compliance. Professionals at Sime Darby should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the risks identified in the matrix. This should be followed by an assessment of the potential impact on all relevant stakeholders. The next step involves consulting internal policies, ethical guidelines, and applicable regulations to determine the appropriate course of action. Open communication and collaboration with stakeholders are crucial to developing effective and sustainable solutions. Finally, continuous monitoring and review of implemented strategies are necessary to ensure ongoing compliance and ethical conduct. Question 5. The risk matrix shows potential negative impacts on local communities and the environment stemming from a new Sime Darby plantation expansion project. What is the most appropriate stakeholder engagement strategy to address these identified risks? Option A. Dismiss the concerns of affected communities and environmental groups as mere opposition to development and proceed with the project as planned. Option B. Focus solely on meeting the minimum legal requirements for environmental impact assessments and community consultation without further engagement. Option C. Prioritize short-term cost savings by avoiding extensive community engagement and mitigation efforts, assuming potential issues can be managed reactively. Option D. Proactively engage with affected communities and environmental groups to understand their concerns and collaboratively develop mitigation strategies. The correct answer is D. Proactively engage with affected communities and environmental groups to understand their concerns and collaboratively develop mitigation strategies. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Sime Darby employees due to the inherent conflict between maximizing shareholder value and upholding ethical stakeholder engagement, particularly when dealing with sensitive environmental and social impacts. The risk matrix highlights potential negative consequences, demanding a balanced approach that considers the long-term sustainability of the company and its relationships with all affected parties, not just immediate financial returns. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing interests in a manner that aligns with regulatory expectations and ethical principles. The correct approach involves proactively engaging with affected communities and environmental groups to understand their concerns and collaboratively develop mitigation strategies. This demonstrates a commitment to responsible corporate citizenship and aligns with the principles of good governance and sustainability reporting, which are increasingly mandated or expected by regulatory bodies and investors. By seeking to address concerns before they escalate into formal complaints or regulatory investigations, Sime Darby can build trust, enhance its reputation, and avoid potential legal and financial repercussions. This proactive and collaborative stance is ethically sound, as it respects the rights and interests of all stakeholders. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the concerns of affected communities and environmental groups as mere opposition to development. This failure to acknowledge legitimate grievances can lead to significant reputational damage, legal challenges, and regulatory sanctions. It violates ethical obligations to consider the broader societal impact of business operations and disregards the spirit of regulations that promote transparency and stakeholder consultation. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on compliance with minimum legal requirements, without considering the broader ethical implications or the expectations of stakeholders. While meeting legal obligations is essential, it is often insufficient to maintain a strong social license to operate. This approach risks alienating stakeholders and can lead to a perception of corporate indifference, potentially triggering more stringent regulatory scrutiny or public backlash. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to prioritize short-term cost savings by avoiding engagement or mitigation efforts. This short-sighted strategy ignores the potential for long-term costs associated with reputational damage, legal disputes, and operational disruptions. It is ethically questionable as it places financial gain above the well-being of communities and the environment, and it is likely to be viewed unfavorably by regulators and investors focused on sustainable business practices. Professionals at Sime Darby should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the identified risks and their potential impact on all stakeholders. This should be followed by an assessment of relevant regulatory requirements and ethical guidelines. The next step involves exploring various engagement and mitigation strategies, evaluating their potential effectiveness, costs, and benefits from a multi-stakeholder perspective. The chosen approach should prioritize transparency, fairness, and long-term sustainability, ensuring that decisions are defensible from both a regulatory and ethical standpoint. Question 6. The risk matrix shows that a new plantation development project for Sime Darby presents a high probability of significant soil erosion and water contamination, potentially impacting local biodiversity and downstream water sources. Despite these risks, the projected financial returns are exceptionally high. Considering Sime Darby's commitment to sustainable practices and adherence to Malaysian environmental regulation, what is the most appropriate course of action for the project management team? Option A. Proceed with the project as planned, focusing on the high financial returns and addressing any environmental issues reactively if they arise. Option B. Halt the project indefinitely due to the identified environmental risks, prioritizing environmental protection above all else. Option C. Conduct a detailed environmental impact assessment. Develop robust mitigation strategies to minimize erosion and contamination, and seek expert consultation to ensure compliance with all relevant Malaysian environmental laws before proceeding. Option D. Delegate the responsibility of managing environmental risks to the local community, assuming they will implement appropriate measures. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the project as planned, focusing on the high financial returns and addressing any environmental issues reactively if they arise. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for Sime Darby employees due to the inherent conflict between maximizing shareholder value and upholding ethical business practices, particularly when dealing with potential environmental impacts. The risk matrix highlights a situation where a proposed project, while financially attractive, carries significant environmental risks that could lead to regulatory scrutiny, reputational damage, and long-term operational challenges. Careful judgment is required to balance these competing interests. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the environmental risks and the implementation of robust mitigation strategies, even if it increases initial project costs or slightly reduces immediate profitability. This aligns with the principles of sustainable business practices and corporate social responsibility, which are increasingly embedded in regulatory frameworks and investor expectations. For Sime Darby, adhering to Malaysian environmental regulations and international best practices for environmental management is paramount. This approach prioritizes long-term value creation and stakeholder trust over short-term gains, demonstrating a commitment to responsible corporate citizenship. An incorrect approach would be to downplay or ignore the identified environmental risks to expedite project approval and maximize immediate financial returns. This failure to adequately assess and mitigate environmental impacts could lead to breaches of Malaysian environmental laws, such as the Environmental Quality Act 1974, resulting in fines, operational shutdowns, and severe reputational damage. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with the project without transparently communicating the identified risks to relevant stakeholders, including regulatory bodies and potentially affected communities. This lack of transparency violates ethical principles of good governance and can erode trust, leading to significant backlash and legal challenges. Professionals at Sime Darby should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive risk identification and assessment process, followed by the development of clear mitigation plans. This framework should incorporate a stakeholder engagement strategy to ensure all relevant parties are informed and their concerns are addressed. Ethical considerations and regulatory compliance must be integrated into every stage of the decision-making process, ensuring that financial objectives do not override environmental and social responsibilities. Question 7. System analysis indicates that a key client of Sime Darby has requested a specific reporting format for a project that, while not explicitly illegal, appears to circumvent certain disclosure requirements mandated by the Sime Darby hiring assessment tests, implied regulatory framework for financial reporting. The client believes this format will present their project in a more favorable light. What is the most appropriate course of action for a Sime Darby employee in this situation? Option A. Fulfill the client's request by adopting the proposed reporting format, as the client is a significant stakeholder and the format is not explicitly prohibited. Option B. Seek to find a creative interpretation of the regulations to accommodate the client's preferred reporting format without directly violating any rules. Option C. Proceed with the client's requested format, but include a disclaimer stating that the report may not fully comply with all regulatory disclosure requirements. Option D. Politely decline the client's request, explaining that Sime Darby must adhere to its established reporting standards and regulatory obligations, and offer to provide the report in the standard, compliant format. The correct answer is A. Fulfill the client's request by adopting the proposed reporting format, as the client is a significant stakeholder and the format is not explicitly prohibited. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for Sime Darby employees due to the inherent conflict between client interests and the company's ethical obligations. Navigating situations where a client's request might inadvertently lead to a breach of regulatory compliance or ethical standards requires careful judgment and a robust understanding of the relevant framework. The challenge lies in balancing client satisfaction with the imperative to uphold integrity and adhere to legal and professional conduct. The correct approach involves prioritizing regulatory compliance and ethical conduct above all else, even when it might displease a client. This means clearly communicating to the client that their request cannot be fulfilled if it violates any regulations or ethical guidelines. This approach is justified by the Sime Darby hiring assessment tests implicit emphasis on integrity and adherence to established professional standards, which are paramount in any regulated industry. Upholding these principles protects the company's reputation, avoids legal repercussions, and ensures long-term sustainable business practices. An incorrect approach would be to accede to the client's request without thorough due diligence, especially if it involves potentially misleading information or circumventing established procedures. This could lead to regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and a breach of professional ethics. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the client's request entirely without providing a reasoned explanation, which can damage client relationships and appear unprofessional. Finally, attempting to find a loophole or a gray area to satisfy the client's request without a clear ethical and regulatory basis is also professionally unacceptable, as it undermines the spirit of compliance and integrity. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core issue and potential conflicts. This involves consulting relevant internal policies, regulatory guidelines, and ethical codes. If there is any ambiguity, seeking advice from senior management or legal counsel is crucial. The decision should always err on the side of caution and prioritize compliance and ethical behavior, with clear and transparent communication to all stakeholders. Question 8. Upon reviewing the recent market performance of Sime Darby, which has experienced some volatility, how should the company's recruitment team best address potential candidate concerns regarding job security and company stability during the Sime Darby hiring assessment test interviews? Option A. Provide a general overview of the industry's challenges without specifically mentioning Sime Darby's situation, suggesting that all companies are facing similar headwinds. Option B. Emphasize that job security is entirely dependent on individual performance and that external market factors are beyond the company's control, shifting the responsibility entirely to the candidate. Option C. Focus solely on the positive aspects of Sime Darby's business and growth opportunities, avoiding any discussion of recent market fluctuations to maintain a consistently optimistic candidate perception. Option D. Proactively acknowledge the market volatility. Provide factual context on Sime Darby's long-term strategic resilience and diversification, and emphasize the company's commitment to its talent pipeline as a key factor in future success. The correct answer is D. Proactively acknowledge the market volatility, provide factual context on Sime Darby's long-term strategic resilience and diversification, and emphasize the company's commitment to its talent pipeline as a key factor in future success. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for positive public perception and the ethical obligation to disclose material information accurately and transparently to stakeholders, particularly in the context of a hiring assessment. Sime Darby, as a publicly recognized entity, must uphold high standards of corporate governance and ethical conduct. The challenge lies in balancing stakeholder expectations with regulatory compliance and the integrity of the assessment process. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any communication or action taken does not mislead or deceive stakeholders, including potential employees. The correct approach involves a commitment to transparency and adherence to the principles of fair disclosure, aligning with the spirit of the Sime Darby hiring assessment test's regulatory framework. This approach prioritizes providing accurate and unbiased information to candidates, regardless of the company's current public standing. It recognizes that maintaining trust with potential employees is paramount, and that any attempt to artificially inflate the company's image during the assessment process would be a breach of ethical conduct and potentially contravene guidelines related to fair employment practices. This aligns with the overarching principle of integrity expected in professional assessments. An incorrect approach that focuses on selectively highlighting positive aspects while downplaying or omitting negative information would constitute a failure of transparency and potentially misrepresentation. This could be seen as an attempt to manipulate the perception of candidates, undermining the fairness of the assessment. Such an approach would violate ethical principles of honesty and integrity, and could also contravene specific guidelines within the Sime Darby hiring assessment test regulatory framework that mandate truthful representation of the company and its opportunities. Another incorrect approach that involves making vague or unsubstantiated claims about the company's future prospects without concrete evidence would also be professionally unacceptable. This lacks the rigor and factual basis required for credible communication during a hiring process. It risks creating unrealistic expectations among candidates and could be viewed as misleading, thereby failing to uphold the standards of professional conduct expected by Sime Darby and its stakeholders. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the relevant regulatory framework and ethical guidelines. Professionals must prioritize honesty, accuracy, and fairness in all communications. When faced with a situation where there is a potential conflict between corporate interests and ethical obligations, the decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the core ethical principles at stake. 2. Consulting relevant policies and regulations. 3. Considering the potential impact on all stakeholders. And 4. Choosing the course of action that upholds integrity and transparency, even if it is not the most immediately advantageous from a short-term public relations perspective. Question 9. The risk matrix shows a heightened probability of conflicts of interest arising within the procurement department at Sime Darby due to increased engagement with new suppliers. Which stakeholder perspective should guide the immediate response and mitigation strategy for this identified risk? Option A. Prioritizing the speed of supplier onboarding to meet immediate project deadlines. Option B. Delegating the entire responsibility for managing supplier relationships to individual procurement officers without oversight. Option C. Implementing a robust conflict of interest declaration and management process, supported by enhanced due diligence on new suppliers. Option D. Focusing solely on the cost-effectiveness of the new suppliers to maximize immediate profit margins. The correct answer is A. Prioritizing the speed of supplier onboarding to meet immediate project deadlines. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Sime Darby employees due to the inherent conflict between achieving business objectives and adhering to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. The risk matrix highlights potential areas where the company's reputation and legal standing could be jeopardized. Navigating these situations requires a nuanced understanding of the company's internal policies, relevant Malaysian regulations, assuming Sime Darby's primary operating jurisdiction for this assessment, and ethical principles. The core difficulty lies in balancing the pressure to perform with the imperative to act with integrity, especially when faced with situations that might tempt shortcuts or unethical behavior. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and mitigating risks by fostering a culture of transparency and accountability, ensuring all actions align with the Sime Darby Code of Conduct and relevant Malaysian laws, such as the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission Act 2009. This approach prioritizes long-term sustainability and stakeholder trust over short-term gains. It requires employees to understand their reporting obligations and to escalate concerns through established channels without fear of reprisal. This aligns with the ethical duty of care and the legal requirement to prevent and report corrupt practices. An incorrect approach would be to ignore or downplay the risks identified in the matrix, particularly if they relate to potential breaches of ethical standards or regulations. For instance, overlooking a potential conflict of interest for the sake of securing a deal would be a regulatory and ethical failure. This demonstrates a disregard for the company's commitment to integrity and could expose Sime Darby to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of stakeholder confidence. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to conceal or misrepresent information related to identified risks, which constitutes a breach of trust and potentially violates laws related to financial reporting or disclosure. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the identified risks and their potential impact. This involves consulting relevant company policies, the Sime Darby Code of Conduct, and applicable Malaysian laws. When faced with a decision, professionals should ask, does this action align with our ethical values? Does it comply with all relevant regulations? What are the potential consequences for Sime Darby and its stakeholders if this risk materializes? If there is any doubt, the professional should seek guidance from their supervisor, the legal department, or the compliance function. This proactive and principled approach ensures that decisions are not only legally sound, but also ethically defensible, safeguarding the company's reputation and long-term success. Question 10. The efficiency study reveals that a key supplier for Sime Darby, whose proposal offers significant cost savings, is owned by a close family member of a senior manager involved in the procurement decision. What is the most appropriate course of action for the senior manager? Option A. Advise the supplier to withdraw their proposal to avoid any appearance of impropriety, even if their offering is superior. Option B. Advocate for the supplier's proposal to the procurement committee, highlighting its efficiency benefits while downplaying the familial connection. Option C. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to the relevant internal compliance department and recuse themselves from all discussions and decisions pertaining to this supplier's contract. Option D. Proceed with the supplier selection process, ensuring the supplier's proposal is objectively the best, and only disclose the relationship if questioned. The correct answer is C. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to the relevant internal compliance department and recuse themselves from all discussions and decisions pertaining to this supplier's contract. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Sime Darby's management team as they navigate the ethical and regulatory implications of a potential conflict of interest arising from a supplier relationship. The challenge lies in balancing the company's pursuit of operational efficiency with its obligation to uphold integrity and comply with relevant regulations and ethical codes. Careful judgment is required to ensure that decisions are not influenced by personal relationships, but are instead driven by the best interests of the company and its stakeholders, adhering to principles of fairness and transparency. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent disclosure of the relationship to the relevant internal authorities and recusal from any decision-making processes directly impacting the supplier. This upholds the principle of avoiding conflicts of interest, a cornerstone of corporate governance and ethical conduct. Specifically, under typical corporate governance frameworks and ethical guidelines that Sime Darby would be expected to adhere to, assuming a standard Malaysian regulatory environment and internal company policies aligned with best practices. Failing to disclose such a relationship and recuse oneself would constitute a breach of duty of loyalty and good faith owed to the company. It undermines the integrity of procurement processes and can lead to perceptions of favoritism, potentially resulting in suboptimal supplier selection and financial detriment to Sime Darby. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the supplier selection without disclosure, rationalizing that the supplier's proposal is genuinely the most efficient. This fails to acknowledge the inherent bias introduced by the personal relationship, regardless of the perceived merit of the proposal. Ethically, it violates the duty to act in the company's best interest and can lead to regulatory scrutiny and reputational damage if discovered. Another incorrect approach would be to disclose the relationship, but still attempt to influence the decision-making process, perhaps by advocating for the supplier. This still represents a conflict of interest, as the personal relationship is being used to sway a corporate decision, undermining the objectivity required in procurement. A further incorrect approach would be to terminate the relationship with the supplier solely due to the personal connection, without a proper evaluation of the supplier's merits. While this avoids a direct conflict, it could lead to a less efficient outcome for Sime Darby and might be seen as unfair to the supplier if the relationship was not a barrier to objective evaluation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the company's code of conduct and conflict of interest policies. When a potential conflict arises, the professional should immediately identify it, assess its nature and severity, and then consult relevant internal policies and supervisors. Transparency and disclosure are paramount. If a conflict exists, the professional must recuse themselves from any decision-making or influence related to the matter. If unsure, seeking guidance from legal, compliance, or HR departments is crucial. The ultimate goal is to protect the company's integrity, ensure fair processes, and maintain stakeholder trust. Question 11. Examination of the data shows that Sime Darby has encountered an unexpected operational disruption at one of its key plantation sites, which is likely to impact its quarterly earnings. The internal team is still gathering precise figures and assessing the full extent of the financial implications. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for Sime Darby's management regarding market disclosure? Option A. Wait until the full financial impact is precisely quantified and a comprehensive internal report is finalized before making any public announcement. Option B. Issue a prompt announcement to Bursa Malaysia Securities Berhad detailing the operational disruption and its potential impact on earnings, while indicating that further details will be provided as they become available. Option C. Inform key stakeholders and major shareholders privately about the situation before making any public announcement. Option D. Disclose only that an operational issue has occurred without specifying the nature of the disruption or its potential financial consequences. The correct answer is B. Issue a prompt announcement to Bursa Malaysia Securities Berhad detailing the operational disruption and its potential impact on earnings, while indicating that further details will be provided as they become available. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Sime Darby, as a publicly listed company, is subject to stringent disclosure requirements and market integrity rules. The pressure to manage market perception while adhering to regulatory obligations creates a delicate balancing act. A hasty or incomplete disclosure could lead to accusations of market manipulation or insider trading, while an overly cautious approach might be seen as withholding material information. Careful judgment is required to ensure transparency, fairness, and compliance with all applicable regulations. The correct approach involves a prompt and accurate assessment of the situation's materiality and the subsequent timely disclosure of relevant information to the market, in accordance with the Malaysian Financial Services Act 2013 and the main market listing requirements of Bursa Malaysia Securities Berhad. This ensures that all investors have access to the same information, promoting a fair and orderly market. The regulatory framework mandates that listed companies must immediately announce any information that is likely to affect the price of securities. An incorrect approach of delaying disclosure until a full internal investigation is complete, without any interim announcement, fails to meet the immediate disclosure obligation. This could be interpreted as an attempt to manage market sentiment or potentially allow certain parties to trade on non-public information, violating the principles of market fairness and integrity. Another incorrect approach of disclosing only partial information or vague statements without providing sufficient detail to allow investors to make informed decisions is also problematic. This can lead to market confusion, speculation, and potential regulatory scrutiny for misleading disclosure. A further incorrect approach of relying solely on informal communication channels or internal discussions without a formal, public announcement to the market is a clear breach of regulatory requirements. Listed companies are obligated to communicate material information through official channels to ensure broad and equitable dissemination. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and market integrity. This involves 1. Immediately assessing the potential materiality of the event. 2. Consulting with legal and compliance departments to understand specific disclosure obligations under the relevant jurisdiction Malaysia, in this case. 3. Preparing a clear, concise, and accurate announcement that addresses the material aspects of the event. 4. Disseminating the announcement through the prescribed official channels in a timely manner. 5. Continuing to monitor the situation and provide further updates as necessary. Question 12. Assessment of the appropriate internal procedure for Sime Darby to follow when a significant operational disruption occurs at one of its key plantation sites, which is likely to materially affect the company's financial performance before any public announcement is made. Option A. Inform only the board of directors and key senior management about the disruption and its potential impact, without engaging broader internal teams or external communication strategies. Option B. Initiate a comprehensive impact assessment involving relevant departments to evaluate financial, operational, and reputational consequences, and consult with legal and compliance teams to ensure adherence to disclosure regulations before communicating with the market. Option C. Wait for the situation to stabilize and for a clearer picture of the financial impact to emerge before considering any public disclosure. Option D. Immediately issue a press release detailing the operational disruption and its potential financial implications to ensure full transparency with investors. The correct answer is B. Initiate a comprehensive impact assessment involving relevant departments to evaluate financial, operational, and reputational consequences, and consult with legal and compliance teams to ensure adherence to disclosure regulations before communicating with the market. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Sime Darby, as a publicly listed company, is subject to stringent disclosure requirements and ethical standards. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the need for timely and accurate information dissemination to the market with the potential for sensitive information to be exploited if released prematurely. A robust impact assessment is crucial to ensure compliance with regulatory frameworks, maintain market integrity, and uphold investor confidence. The correct approach involves a comprehensive impact assessment that systematically evaluates the potential consequences of a significant event on Sime Darby's operations, financial performance, and share price. This assessment should consider various stakeholder groups, including investors, regulators, employees, and the public. The process should involve cross-functional teams to gather diverse perspectives and identify all relevant risks and opportunities. Crucially, this approach aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and regulatory compliance, such as those mandated by the Malaysian Code on Corporate Governance and Bursa Malaysia's listing requirements, which emphasize transparency, accountability, and timely disclosure of material information. By proactively identifying and mitigating potential negative impacts, Sime Darby can ensure that its responses are strategic, compliant, and in the best interest of the company and its shareholders. An incorrect approach would be to immediately disclose all information without prior assessment. This could lead to market speculation, misinterpretation of data, and potential regulatory scrutiny for inadequate or misleading disclosures. Another incorrect approach is to delay disclosure indefinitely, hoping the issue resolves itself. This violates the principle of timely disclosure of material information and can erode investor trust, potentially leading to accusations of market manipulation or insider trading if information is selectively leaked. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the financial impact without considering reputational or operational consequences would be incomplete and could lead to unforeseen problems. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with identifying the event and its potential materiality. This should be followed by a thorough impact assessment involving relevant stakeholders. Based on the assessment, a communication strategy should be developed that ensures compliance with disclosure obligations, addresses stakeholder concerns, and protects the company's interests. This process requires critical thinking, ethical judgment, and a deep understanding of the regulatory landscape. Question 13. Which approach would be most appropriate for a Sime Darby project manager to adopt when a new initiative is proposed that might have implications for environmental regulations to ensure compliance and mitigate potential risks? Option A. Proceed with the initiative, assuming it is compliant, and address any regulatory issues if they arise later. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive regulatory impact assessment involving legal and compliance teams before proceeding with the initiative. Option C. Prioritize the potential financial benefits of the initiative and address regulatory concerns only if explicitly raised by authorities. Option D. Implement the initiative immediately to gain a competitive advantage and conduct a post-implementation review of regulatory compliance. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive regulatory impact assessment involving legal and compliance teams before proceeding with the initiative. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Sime Darby employees due to the inherent conflict between achieving business objectives and upholding ethical conduct, particularly when faced with potential regulatory breaches. The pressure to meet targets can create an environment where shortcuts are considered, making it crucial for individuals to navigate these situations with integrity and a strong understanding of the applicable regulatory framework. The challenge lies in balancing commercial imperatives with legal and ethical obligations, ensuring that the company's reputation and long-term sustainability are not jeopardized by short-term gains. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves proactively identifying potential regulatory impacts and engaging with relevant internal stakeholders and legal counsel. This demonstrates a commitment to compliance and risk mitigation. By seeking expert advice and conducting a thorough impact assessment, Sime Darby employees ensure that any proposed actions align with the regulatory framework governing their operations. This approach prioritizes due diligence, ethical decision-making, and adherence to the law, which are fundamental principles for responsible corporate behavior and are implicitly expected under general corporate governance guidelines and any specific industry regulations that Sime Darby operates within. Incorrect approach is analysis. Proceeding with the initiative without a formal impact assessment or seeking expert advice ignores potential legal and ethical ramifications. This could lead to regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and financial losses for Sime Darby. It represents a failure to exercise due diligence and a disregard for compliance obligations. Focusing solely on the potential financial benefits without considering the regulatory landscape is a short-sighted and unethical approach. It prioritizes profit over compliance, which is a direct contravention of responsible business practices and could expose Sime Darby to significant legal repercussions. Delaying the assessment until after the initiative has been implemented is a reactive and irresponsible strategy. It increases the likelihood of discovering noncompliance issues after the fact, making remediation more difficult and costly, and potentially leading to severe penalties. This approach signifies a lack of foresight and a failure to integrate compliance into the planning stages of business activities. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Sime Darby should adopt a proactive and risk-aware mindset. When faced with new initiatives or significant business decisions, the first step should always be to consider the potential regulatory implications. This involves consulting internal compliance departments, legal counsel, and relevant industry guidelines. A structured impact assessment process should be integrated into the decision-making framework, ensuring that all potential risks, including regulatory noncompliance, are identified, evaluated, and mitigated before any action is taken. This systematic approach fosters a culture of integrity and ensures that business activities are conducted within the bounds of the law and ethical standards. Question 14. Implementation of a new supplier relationship at Sime Darby has led to a vendor offering a senior manager a high-value, branded electronic gadget as a token of appreciation for their swift processing of an initial order. The senior manager is unsure if accepting this gift aligns with Sime Darby's ethical standards and regulatory obligations. Which of the following approaches best reflects professional decision-making in this situation? Option A. Accept the gift and keep it discreetly without informing anyone at Sime Darby to avoid unnecessary complications. Option B. Accept the gift as a gesture of goodwill, assuming it is a standard business practice and does not influence future decisions. Option C. Consult Sime Darby's official gift and entertainment policy to determine the gift's value threshold and disclosure requirements before making a decision. Option D. Immediately reject the gift, citing general ethical concerns, without consulting company policy. Correct answer is B. Accept the gift as a gesture of goodwill, assuming it is a standard business practice and does not influence future decisions. Explanation. The scenario presents a professional challenge for Sime Darby employees regarding the ethical and regulatory implications of accepting gifts. Navigating this requires a deep understanding of the company's internal policies, which are designed to prevent conflicts of interest and maintain the integrity of business dealings. The challenge lies in distinguishing between appropriate gestures of goodwill and inducements that could compromise professional judgment or appear to do so. Strict adherence to these policies is paramount to upholding Sime Darby's reputation and ensuring fair business practices. The correct approach involves a thorough review of Sime Darby's gift and entertainment policy, specifically focusing on the thresholds for monetary value and the nature of the gift. This approach is professionally sound because it directly addresses the potential for conflicts of interest and bribery, which are regulated by both company policy and relevant anti-corruption laws. By seeking clarification and adhering to the policy's guidelines on disclosure and acceptance, employees demonstrate due diligence and ethical conduct, safeguarding both themselves and the company from reputational damage and legal repercussions. An incorrect approach of accepting the gift without considering the policy or its value fails to acknowledge the inherent risks. This could lead to a violation of Sime Darby's gift and entertainment policy, potentially constituting a breach of conduct and exposing the employee and the company to accusations of impropriety or even bribery, depending on the context and value. Another incorrect approach of immediately rejecting the gift without understanding the policy or the donor's intent might be overly cautious and could inadvertently damage a valuable business relationship. While prudence is important, a blanket rejection without due consideration of the policy's nuances can be detrimental. A third incorrect approach of accepting the gift and assuming it is acceptable without any form of documentation or disclosure bypasses the company's control mechanisms. This lack of transparency is a significant ethical and regulatory failure, as it prevents proper oversight and could be interpreted as an attempt to conceal a potential conflict of interest. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding and adherence to company policies. This involves 1. Identifying the relevant policy, e.g., gift and entertainment policy. 2. Assessing the gift against the policy's criteria, value, nature, donor relationship. 3. Seeking clarification from the appropriate internal department, e.g., compliance, legal, if there is any ambiguity. 4. Documenting and disclosing the gift as required by the policy. 5. Acting in a manner that upholds the company's values and reputation. Question 15. The audit findings indicate potential weaknesses in Sime Darby's internal control framework related to procurement processes. Which of the following approaches best addresses these findings while adhering to principles of good corporate governance and regulatory compliance? Option A. Immediately implement a new, unproven procurement software system to replace the existing one, assuming this will resolve all identified control weaknesses. Option B. Conduct a detailed root cause analysis of the identified weaknesses, develop a comprehensive remediation plan with clear timelines and responsibilities, and communicate these findings and the proposed actions to senior management and the audit committee. Option C. Classify the audit findings as minor issues and monitor them informally without formal reporting or remediation plans, as they do not appear to pose an immediate financial risk. Option D. Focus on drafting public relations statements to mitigate potential negative perceptions, while deferring detailed analysis and remediation of the audit findings. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed root cause analysis of the identified weaknesses, develop a comprehensive remediation plan with clear timelines and responsibilities, and communicate these findings and the proposed actions to senior management and the audit committee. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need to address audit findings with the long-term implications of communication and stakeholder trust. Sime Darby, as a publicly listed company, operates under strict regulatory scrutiny, and the manner in which it responds to internal audit reports can significantly impact its reputation and investor confidence. The challenge lies in selecting an approach that is both compliant with regulatory expectations and ethically sound, ensuring transparency and accountability without causing undue alarm or misinterpretation. The correct approach involves a thorough, fact-based assessment of the audit findings, followed by a structured plan for remediation, and then communicating these findings and the remediation plan to relevant stakeholders, including senior management and potentially the board. This approach aligns with principles of good corporate governance and regulatory compliance, which emphasize proactive risk management and transparent reporting. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit of regulations that require companies to maintain robust internal controls and to promptly address any identified weaknesses. Ethical considerations also dictate that issues impacting the company's operations or financial health should be brought to the attention of those responsible for oversight and decision-making in a clear and actionable manner. An approach that focuses solely on immediate damage control without a comprehensive understanding of the root cause is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to superficial fixes that do not address underlying systemic issues, potentially resulting in recurring problems and further regulatory scrutiny. It also fails to uphold the ethical duty of transparency and accountability to stakeholders. Another incorrect approach would be to downplay the significance of the audit findings or to delay reporting them. This is ethically problematic as it misleads stakeholders about the true state of the company's internal controls and risk management. From a regulatory perspective, such delays can be interpreted as a failure to comply with reporting obligations and can lead to penalties. A third incorrect approach might be to immediately implement drastic, unverified solutions without proper analysis. While seemingly proactive, this can be inefficient, costly, and may not effectively resolve the identified issues. It also bypasses the necessary due diligence and stakeholder consultation required for significant operational changes, potentially creating new risks. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the full scope and impact of audit findings. This involves a systematic review, consultation with relevant departments, and the development of a well-reasoned remediation plan. Communication should be timely, accurate, and tailored to the audience, ensuring that all parties have the necessary information to make informed decisions. This process fosters a culture of continuous improvement and strengthens the company's governance framework. Question 16. During the evaluation of a significant new operational challenge impacting Sime Darby's supply chain, which has emerged shortly after the close of the financial year, but before the finalization of annual financial statements, what is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with regulatory frameworks and ethical standards? Option A. Inform only the board of directors and key senior management about the operational challenge, without making any public announcement or adjusting the current financial statements. Option B. Disregard the operational challenge as it occurred after the financial year end and therefore does not directly affect the historical financial statements. Option C. Conduct a thorough internal assessment of the operational challenge's potential financial impact, consult with relevant departments, and determine the necessity for immediate disclosure or adjustments to financial reporting in line with Malaysian financial reporting standards and Bursa Malaysia listing requirements. Option D. Defer the assessment and any potential disclosure of the operational challenge until the next scheduled quarterly financial reporting period to streamline reporting processes. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough internal assessment of the operational challenge's potential financial impact, consult with relevant departments, and determine the necessity for immediate disclosure or adjustments to financial reporting in line with Malaysian financial reporting standards and Bursa Malaysia listing requirements. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Sime Darby, as a publicly listed company, operates under strict regulatory scrutiny. The challenge lies in balancing the need for timely and accurate financial reporting with the ethical obligation to ensure all material information is disclosed appropriately, without misleading stakeholders. Misjudging the materiality or timing of a disclosure can lead to significant reputational damage, regulatory penalties, and loss of investor confidence. Careful judgment is required to assess the potential impact of the new information on the company's financial position and future prospects. The correct approach involves a thorough internal assessment of the new information's potential impact on Sime Darby's financial statements and business operations. This includes consulting with relevant departments such as finance, legal, and investor relations, and potentially seeking external expert advice if necessary. Primary regulatory framework governing such situations in Malaysia would be the Malaysian Financial Reporting Standards, MFRS, and the listing requirements of Bursa Malaysia Securities Berhad. MFRS, particularly those related to events after the reporting period, mandate the recognition and disclosure of events that provide evidence of conditions that existed at the end of the reporting period or conditions that arose after the reporting period. The Bursa Malaysia listing requirements emphasize timely disclosure of material information that could affect the trading of securities. Therefore, a proactive and comprehensive internal review ensures compliance with these disclosure obligations, allowing for appropriate adjustments to financial statements or timely announcements to the market. An incorrect approach that involves delaying the assessment until the next quarterly reporting cycle is professionally unacceptable because it violates the principle of timely disclosure. Material information that could influence investor decisions should not be withheld, even if it falls outside the immediate reporting period. This failure to disclose promptly can be interpreted as an attempt to manipulate market perception or conceal negative developments, leading to regulatory sanctions under Bursa Malaysia's listing requirements. Another incorrect approach, which is to dismiss the information as insignificant without proper due diligence, is also professionally unsound. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to appreciate the potential impact of new information on Sime Darby's financial health and market standing. It bypasses the necessary steps to assess materiality, which is a cornerstone of financial reporting and disclosure regulations. Such an oversight could lead to materially misstated financial statements and a breach of disclosure obligations. Finally, an approach that involves selectively disclosing the information only to a select group of stakeholders is ethically and regulatorily flawed. This constitutes selective disclosure or tipping, which is strictly prohibited by securities laws and Bursa Malaysia's listing requirements. All material information must be disseminated to the public simultaneously to ensure a level playing field for all investors. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Identify and gather all relevant information. 2. Assess the potential impact of the information on Sime Darby's financial performance, position, and future outlook. 3. Consult with internal experts, finance, legal, investor relations, and if necessary, external advisors. 4. Determine the materiality of the information based on established accounting standards and regulatory guidelines. 5. Decide on the appropriate course of action, which may include adjusting financial statements, issuing a press release, or making a formal announcement to Bursa Malaysia. 6. Ensure all actions are taken in compliance with MFRS and Bursa Malaysia listing requirements, prioritizing transparency and timely disclosure. Question 17. The control framework reveals a potential weakness in the expense reimbursement process at Sime Darby, specifically concerning the adequacy of supporting documentation for certain travel claims. What is the most appropriate next step to manage this identified control gap? Option A. Defer any action until the next scheduled internal audit cycle to avoid disrupting current operational workflows. Option B. Conduct a thorough impact assessment to understand the potential financial, operational, and compliance implications of the documentation weakness before proposing any remediation. Option C. Immediately implement a new, more stringent approval process for all expense claims, regardless of the value or nature of the claim. Option D. Instruct the finance department to conduct a spot check of recent expense claims and address any discrepancies found on a case-by-case basis. The correct answer is C. Immediately implement a new, more stringent approval process for all expense claims, regardless of the value or nature of the claim. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Sime Darby, as a publicly listed company, operates under strict regulatory scrutiny. The control framework is designed to ensure compliance, ethical conduct, and the integrity of financial reporting. When a potential control weakness is identified, the response must be swift, thorough, and aligned with established governance principles and regulatory expectations. The challenge lies in balancing the need for immediate action with the requirement for a systematic and well-documented impact assessment to understand the full ramifications before implementing corrective measures. The correct approach involves conducting a comprehensive impact assessment. This means systematically evaluating the potential consequences of the identified control weakness across various facets of the business, including financial reporting, operational efficiency, regulatory compliance, and reputational risk. This approach is professionally sound and ethically imperative because it ensures that any remediation efforts are targeted, proportionate, and address the root cause of the issue. It aligns with the principles of good corporate governance, which mandate proactive risk management and robust internal controls. Specifically, it reflects the spirit of regulations that require entities to maintain effective internal controls over financial reporting and to promptly address any deficiencies. An incorrect approach would be to immediately implement a superficial fix without understanding the broader implications. This could lead to wasted resources, the failure to address the actual problem, or even the creation of new risks. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the identified weakness due to its perceived minor nature or the potential for short-term disruption. This failure to act is a direct contravention of the duty to maintain effective controls and could expose Sime Darby to significant regulatory penalties, financial misstatements, and reputational damage. Such inaction would also violate ethical obligations to stakeholders, including shareholders and the public, who rely on the company's integrity. Professionals should approach such situations by first acknowledging the identified issue and initiating a formal process for its evaluation. This process should involve a cross-functional team to ensure all relevant perspectives are considered. The team should then focus on understanding the nature and extent of the control weakness, its potential impact, and the most effective and efficient remediation strategy. Documentation at each stage is crucial for demonstrating due diligence and for future reference and audit purposes. The decision-making process should be guided by a risk-based approach, prioritizing actions that mitigate the most significant potential harms. Question 18. Performance analysis shows that Sime Darby is considering a significant new sustainability initiative aimed at reducing its carbon footprint across its plantation operations. To ensure responsible implementation and compliance, what is the most appropriate approach for assessing the potential impact of this initiative? Option A. focus primarily on the public relations benefits of the initiative, highlighting its green credentials to stakeholders without a deep dive into operational feasibility or regulatory adherence. Option B. Delay a comprehensive impact assessment until the initiative has been fully implemented, allowing for a review of actual outcomes. Option C. Conduct a thorough impact assessment that evaluates financial, operational, regulatory, and reputational implications, aligning with Sime Darby's ESG commitments and relevant disclosure requirements. Option D. Prioritize the immediate cost savings projected by the initiative, assuming that environmental benefits will naturally follow without extensive further analysis. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough impact assessment that evaluates financial, operational, regulatory, and reputational implications, aligning with Sime Darby's ESG commitments and relevant disclosure requirements. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Sime Darby, as a publicly listed company, operates under strict regulatory scrutiny. Need to assess the impact of a new sustainability initiative requires a balanced approach that considers both the potential benefits and the associated risks, particularly concerning compliance and stakeholder communication. Misjudging the impact could lead to reputational damage, regulatory penalties, or misallocation of resources. The correct approach involves a comprehensive impact assessment that considers financial, operational, and regulatory implications. This aligns with good corporate governance principles and the need for transparency and accountability to stakeholders, including shareholders and regulatory bodies. Specifically, it requires understanding how the initiative aligns with Sime Darby's existing policies, any relevant environmental, social, and governance-esque reporting frameworks, and potential disclosure obligations. This proactive and thorough evaluation ensures that any new initiative is not only strategically sound, but also compliant and ethically responsible. An approach that focuses solely on immediate cost savings without considering long-term sustainability or regulatory compliance would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to overlooking potential environmental liabilities or failing to meet evolving stakeholder expectations regarding corporate responsibility. Similarly, an approach that prioritizes public relations over a rigorous assessment of operational feasibility and regulatory adherence risks misrepresenting the initiative's true impact and could lead to future compliance issues. An approach that delays the assessment until after implementation ignores the fundamental principle of due diligence and proactive risk management, potentially exposing Sime Darby to unforeseen consequences and regulatory scrutiny. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the objectives of the impact assessment. This involves identifying all relevant stakeholders, understanding their expectations, and mapping out potential impacts across financial, operational, environmental, social, and governance dimensions. The framework should then involve gathering data, analyzing risks and opportunities, and developing mitigation strategies. Finally, it requires clear communication of findings and recommendations to relevant decision-makers, ensuring that decisions are informed by a holistic understanding of the initiative's potential consequences and are aligned with Sime Darby's strategic goals and regulatory obligations. Question 19. The audit findings indicate potential misstatements in Sime Darby's revenue recognition policies. Which of the following approaches best addresses these findings while adhering to the Companies Act 2016 and Malaysian Financial Reporting Standards, MFRS? Option A. Implement changes to revenue recognition processes without consulting the legal and compliance departments to expedite the resolution. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment to understand the full implications of the findings on financial statements and compliance, and develop a remediation plan accordingly. Option C. Immediately revise revenue recognition policies to reduce reported revenue and associated costs to minimize potential penalties. Option D. Postpone any corrective actions until further clarification is obtained from the external auditors, without initiating any internal review. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment to understand the full implications of the findings on financial statements and compliance, and develop a remediation plan accordingly. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need to address audit findings with the long-term implications for Sime Darby's reputation and regulatory compliance. The pressure to act quickly might lead to hasty decisions that overlook critical compliance requirements. Careful judgment is essential to ensure that any remediation efforts are not only effective, but also adhere strictly to the relevant regulatory framework. The correct approach involves a thorough impact assessment that considers all potential consequences of proposed actions. This approach is professionally sound because it aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and regulatory compliance. Specifically, it necessitates understanding how any proposed changes might affect Sime Darby's adherence to the Malaysian Financial Reporting Standards, MFRS, and the Companies Act 2016. A comprehensive impact assessment ensures that remediation plans are robust, sustainable, and do not inadvertently create new compliance risks. It also demonstrates a commitment to transparency and accountability, which are vital for maintaining stakeholder trust and regulatory standing. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost reduction without considering the regulatory implications would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the Companies Act 2016, which mandates accurate financial reporting and proper record-keeping. Such an approach could lead to noncompliance, resulting in penalties, reputational damage, and potential legal repercussions for Sime Darby. Another incorrect approach, which involves implementing changes without consulting relevant internal stakeholders like the legal and compliance departments, is also professionally unsound. This oversight violates the principle of due diligence and internal control. It risks implementing solutions that are not legally compliant or that create internal conflicts, undermining the effectiveness of the remediation and potentially exposing Sime Darby to further regulatory scrutiny. A third incorrect approach, which is to delay action until further clarification is sought from external auditors without initiating any internal review, is professionally weak. While seeking clarification is important, inaction can be detrimental. The Companies Act 2016 and MFRS require timely identification and rectification of accounting errors. Delaying action, even while seeking external advice, can be interpreted as a failure to act with due diligence and could exacerbate the impact of the audit findings. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, fully understand the audit findings and their potential implications. Second, engage relevant internal departments, legal, compliance, finance, to assess the situation from all angles. Third, conduct a thorough impact assessment, considering regulatory, financial, operational, and reputational consequences. Fourth, develop a remediation plan that is compliant, effective, and sustainable. Finally, implement the plan with clear communication and ongoing monitoring. Question 20. The audit findings indicate a potential misstatement in the revenue recognition process at Sime Darby's Malaysian operations due to inadequate documentation supporting certain sales transactions. This could lead to an overstatement of revenue in the current financial period. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the finance department? Option A. Conduct a detailed review of all sales transactions within the identified period. Identify the specific transactions with insufficient documentation, quantify the potential impact on revenue, and develop a remediation plan to strengthen internal controls over revenue recognition. Option B. Inform the external auditors of the potential misstatement and await their instructions on how to proceed with the financial reporting. Option C. Immediately halt all further sales transactions until the documentation process is fully revised and approved by senior management. Option D. Proceed with the current financial reporting as planned, assuming the misstatement is minor and will be corrected in the next audit cycle. The correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed review of all sales transactions within the identified period. Identify the specific transactions with insufficient documentation, quantify the potential impact on revenue, and develop a remediation plan to strengthen internal controls over revenue recognition. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for operational efficiency with the long-term implications of regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. Sime Darby, as a publicly listed entity, is subject to stringent reporting and disclosure requirements. The audit findings highlight a potential gap in internal controls, which, if not addressed appropriately, could lead to misstatements in financial reporting, regulatory sanctions, and reputational damage. Careful judgment is required to determine the most effective and compliant course of action. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation and remediation plan. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and regulatory frameworks that mandate accurate financial reporting and robust internal controls. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit and letter of regulations that require companies to maintain adequate accounting records and implement systems to prevent and detect fraud and error. By initiating a detailed review and developing a corrective action plan, Sime Darby demonstrates a commitment to transparency, accountability, and compliance, thereby mitigating potential risks. An approach that involves downplaying the findings or delaying corrective actions is professionally unacceptable. Such actions would constitute a failure to uphold the company's fiduciary duties and could violate regulatory obligations to report financial information accurately. Ignoring or minimizing audit findings suggests a disregard for internal controls and a potential willingness to overlook noncompliance, which can lead to severe penalties, including fines, sanctions, and legal action. Furthermore, it erodes stakeholder confidence and can have a detrimental impact on the company's reputation and market standing. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the scope and severity of the audit findings. This involves gathering all relevant information, consulting with internal audit, compliance, and legal departments, and assessing the potential impact on financial statements and regulatory obligations. The decision-making process should prioritize adherence to the applicable regulatory framework and ethical standards, ensuring that any actions taken are transparent, well-documented, and aimed at achieving sustainable compliance and operational integrity.